Hello and welcome. It's Vivian Davis and we're going to be starting here in just a moment. I have a little bit of, smooth jazz playing in the background. Hopefully it won't be too loud or I'll turn it off. And I'm going to start a little bit, with a short drawing demonstration to go ahead and get this sketch down for what we're going to work on today. So for those of you watching that we're hoping to get a little bit of a drawing lesson, that's what you're going to get. I'll be teaching some additional programs going forward, especially during this kind of transitional period we're going through, and there won't be any charge for the videos. So I encourage you to come in and kind of watch some different mediums and, different source materials and just kind of have some fun with me. That's what I'm doing because I am a professional artist and I am not doing a whole lot of work right now. I do some of my own painting and sculpting, but I decided because I do teach classes that I'd focus a little bit, practice, and get to use Facebook Live video, which I had never done before. So I am still a novice. I finally got a tripod so that I could do my overhead shots, so you'll see mostly my hands. And then I've got some things around that I'm going to show you as well. So I think I'm going to turn this down just a moment. Alexa, volume 1. Just because it's a little distracting for me. And I encourage you to play some music as well where you are right now. All right, so again, I'm Vivian Davis. My business is Tutoring Art. I have been teaching art classes in different programs since about 2007, and in Maryland primarily until about 8 months almost now that I've been here in Norfolk, Virginia. So I applied to be a resident artist at the art studio in Norfolk, and so I have a small space there now. And I've brought some of those materials that I had brought to my space home so I could continue to teach some classes and just kind of gear up for when we get back, when we open back up and we can actually have people in front of us. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment. If you have any ideas of classes you'd like to see, send me a comment as well or send me a message and I'll respond as soon as I can. I have kind of a series that I'm doing based on some things I've taught before, and this one is specifically water-soluble pencils, which in a sense work as a cross between pencil and watercolor. So we're going to do that today. I have some examples of things I've done. I tend to paint and sculpt more than I draw, so this is a very good practice for me as well. And so when I do draw, I like to work in charcoal. So you'll kind of see, this is not a finished piece. This is just something I did as an example in class. Here is the photo reference. And so when I teach youth especially, we just kind of grab photos off the internet. These are not for resale, so it's perfectly acceptable for practice. And this is one of those practice pieces, which I didn't actually finish, but gives you an idea. This is another one that I did more recently, and I actually started this one in charcoal and then went ahead and added a little bit of the water-soluble pencil, and you can kind of see the photo reference there in the corner. So I use a variety of black and white photos when I'm working in black and white, and then for advanced classes we start working with color so that we can know how to transfer those tones. This is a sample that I actually did last week? I think Friday, Monday? I can't remember now. Gosh, the days just passed by. This is wine, absolutely wine pigment, but this morning I thought, I could use some darker tones. I hadn't finished it yet, so I went ahead and put a little bit of the water-soluble pencil in this as well. So when you see those really deep blacks, that's what that is. All the purples and the red that you see are wine, absolute wine. So I'll do another tutorial for anyone that's interested going forward on that as well. Then, if you want to learn to draw, there's a lot of subjects on the internet nowadays. You just do a Google search. You can find a lot of drawing lessons. And I meant to reference this, so I'll put it in my comments later. But this is a site that I took this from. Does a lot of youth student learning, and this was a really fun one to do this frog using just pencil and the different values of pencil, which I'll explain the difference between that and the ones I'm using today. So if you don't have the water soluble and you're not going to work with water, that's fine. You can work with pencil because you'll be doing a lot of the same, but you'll just be not using the water, okay? So this is a good example, and it actually walks you through step by step, and it's kind of fun. And this was my sample piece, so you can see with just pencil how you can still get really dark. It's not charcoal. Charcoal, you get that nice rich black, but it's still a nice representation. Okay, so those are my samples for today. I at some point may do a chalk pastel class. I didn't have a handy chalk pastel sample to show you, except for this one that I had not finished. I just used this parrot book. I did this for a class, and this is about as far as I got. So I love working with chalk pastel as well. I have been working in a variety of mediums for a long time because I teach classes, and so I tend to kind of run around with the different ones, and my discipline, I guess if you want to call it, is typically in painting or in sculpting. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a sketch. Now, if you went on the event page under discussion, there is a photo reference. So if you're near the computer and you have not printed that out, or you don't have your computer, with that picture on it to work from right now, then I suggest you go to the event. You'll be able to catch right back up with me, but go to the event page for this program, which is drawing with water-soluble graphite pencils, and then go on the discussion page. You'll see the materials you needed, and you'll also see a black and white photograph of a pelican. And I'm going to grab my Surface Pro and just kind of show you that real quick so you can kind of see what that looks like. Okay, so that's what we're going to use as a reference today. Again, I take photos from different places when we're using it for just practice. So I like to use black and white when I'm showing black and white medium, okay? So the first thing we're gonna do is kind of create an outline of the pelican, and I'm gonna work a little bit bigger than what's on my computer right now. You're welcome to work in any size. I wouldn't necessarily work tiny. Like a lot of young people like to start out really small because they're less intimidated, but bigger to me is actually better. I think it's easier to work with. So give yourself some space. We're not completely, going to get this. We're not going to get this perfectly in 2 hours. So if you want to work with just a portion of this, that's fine. You don't have to do the whole thing. Or you can go ahead and do your outline first and then come back to it and finish it after. The reason for doing these tutorials is to get people trying different mediums. And so I can't do all the lesson that I need to in 2 hours. If I were teaching a private lesson, this would be over a series of different classes, and we would get more advanced as we go. So we're going to get the basics today. Okay, so we're going to draw the shape. So if you have the picture in front of you, then you'll be able to follow along. If you don't, then you're just going to watch me draw, which is fine too. So that's good. Okay, so I'm going to start out, and I'm going to start at the base of this bird. And I'm working in a very light pencil, and so I've got a 2H in front of me, and I'm thinking you guys may not be able to see that very well. So maybe I'll work in the actual graphite pencils, which I'm going to explain in just a few minutes. I think I'm going to pick my 2B, okay? Because otherwise you won't be able to see. I don't like erasing on watercolor paper, and this is what I'm using, but for the sake of you guys being able to see what it is I'm doing, I'll go ahead and risk that. Okay, so I'm gonna start out on the left side, and it's just gonna be kind of sketchy. That way, if I do need to erase, I can erase gently. And typically when I'm drawing, What I want to do is kind of figure out my size, okay? So I'm starting here, but I'm not going to keep drawing because I want to measure as I go along. So for example, if you look at the shape of this pelican, it is almost an S. And so by doing that S shape, I can do a light sketch and just keep adding to it. So I started here, and I'm gonna make him about maybe this wide. So I'm going to determine how wide I want to make him, and then I can figure out from there where I'm going to go. So if I'm drawing based on the absolute basics, I would be looking for shapes. I don't want to make complete sketch because we're going to be putting a watercolor pencil on there. And so I don't want to do too much drawing, but this would be a shape, right? So when I look at this shape, what do I see? That's the big thing when you're drawing. Now this is going to fade off the paper because I don't have the full pelican. So I'm going to kind of stop in places. But I'm just going to kind of figure out where my shapes are. And then remember I said there's kind of an S. So now I'm going to end up erasing. You'll see I'm going to do some erasing. I'm going to look at the wing right up here, and I'm going to say, okay, when I go up and I look at that photo reference, his head kind of goes here and then beyond. A way to draw, if you're enlarging something, is using a grid drawing, which means you can print out your subject matter and you can put lines on it so that you end up with a bunch of blocks, and then you put those same blocks on the paper that you're enlarging, and that kind of helps you get the dimensions as well. You still have to come in and get all the detail. So that's another way. Now, what I typically do when I'm creating something that I'm going to finish and use as a piece that I want to sell, I will draw this on a piece of paper first and then transfer it onto the watercolor paper because I want nice clean lines. And again, I don't like to erase on the watercolor paper, but in this case, I'm just going to do a little bit of that. So now I'm going to look at this wing here again. That's where I started. I'm going to go up, and when I do, I'm going to figure out where I am as far as his head is concerned. Okay. Then the other thing I want to look at is this wing. I want to come up, and then I'm going to kind of see where, probably takes me to about halfway where the white area is. So I said it's important to have this photo reference because I'm not sure how to position the photo reference. I guess I could have printed it for you guys to see. And then it also helps me determine the angle. So I can bring my line up and I can see that I have that type of an angle where his beak is going to come down. And then I can kind of see this angle and make sure, and it'll also show me between the chest and the beak where I'm supposed to be with that. Okay. So then I'm going to bring this line up. Again, I'm just going really sketchy at the moment. And I have to determine, okay, how far up am I going? So let's use another point. So if I, again, use the wing here and I go straight up, this is not actually going to be there. I'm going to erase that. And now I wouldn't even draw a line. I would use an imaginary line normally. Then I'm going to come here and I'm going to see that actually right here, where about this line goes, is where that black section of his face is going to start. So I can kind of start that, which means this actually needs to come out a little wider. Okay. And then I'm going to come in some more, and I'm not going very far up from that point. So if I wanted to draw across here, then I would draw that, and that would also help me. But again, using a lighter pencil so that it's easier to erase, because the darker pencil you use, the more lines are going to show. When you try to erase, you're going to still show some lines. Okay, so I know that black section is here. I know this goes up just a little bit more. And then it forms kind of like a little heart almost. So it comes in, and that is where the opening of his beak is. So I'm going to come down a little further. I'm working at a strange angle too. The downfall to doing these videos instead of in person is I have to make sure I get this under the screen, which means my head can't be closer to the paper. So I'm getting as close as I can, but I'm at a little bit of an interesting angle. Okay, so I'm going to come up and actually see, when I look carefully, I realize that this part of the beak is actually higher than that. So I'm already going to have to change that. All right, so I'm going a little lower, and then I'm going to connect. Okay, and I probably have it a little wider than I need to, so I'll erase a little bit of the outside there. Okay, this is like a quickie tutorial, so. Okay, so that helped me, that line helped me determine where, and actually when I draw that line all the way up, it should almost go to where that little heart piece where it comes in is. So that helps a lot. And then when I come down, I'm gonna see that this line just comes around there a little, and this part comes out probably not that far down. I mean, those lines will help you considerably. So when I look at this shape here, it actually is going to come up here. So I'm making him a little fatter than he needed to be. Okay, so now I'm going to erase this. All right, so far so good. If you're drawing with me, I'll give you a second to catch up a little bit, and I'll kind of explain where I'm at again. So I started out, it doesn't matter where you start, you just have to determine where you're going to draw your lines and where you're going to create your, where you're going to figure out your spacing. Because like here, I can see this now that I have this one shape, which means this actually, it kind of looks almost like a bird kind of going forward with the beak. And so I can make this a little bit wider here. A little bit, just a little bit. Okay. So while you guys are doing some of that, I'm going to go ahead and erase some of the lines I don't need. And this is regular pencil that I'm drawing with right now. So if you weren't going to use the water soluble, then you're already off to a good start. This one. And you'll see it's a 2H. So I'm going to remind anyone that just came on or is drawing with regular pencil. Now he's got little hairs up here. I just didn't draw those in yet. So I'm going to come back and do some of those. This is on a black background. So I can either add the color into this, the black in the background, or I'll just draw him straight away without a background, which is probably what I'm going to do today, or at least to start. Okay. All right. So now I've got, I don't need this line at the moment anymore. I don't need this, and I don't need this. So far I have a pretty good shape, I think. Probably off a little. You guys could tell me better because you're seeing it with fresh eyes. I guess it does kind of come more of an angle this way. Okay. All right. So I've got this, and I probably, again, have gone too long with this. So I'm going to curve the little edge there. And the line kind of curves with it. So I'll get rid of that. Okay, now from here, the beak, his head doesn't come out like that. It goes up and over, okay? That means that I have him way too high. let's see, yeah, okay. So I went up way too high for that. That's why I shouldn't have added those hairs yet. Yeah, that's a little better. I think the hairs threw me off. His hairs actually start out a little lower. They start down here. I don't want to lose my picture. Okay, now I can come back out and around and maybe bring that beak out a little bit more just at the top at that angle, because there's another line right in here. And then come out just a little tiny bit. Okay. Right now, I can see that this has to go out a little further this way, because otherwise his head gets too thin. So these are those things you can fix. That's why you want to draw lightly once you start sizing everything. Okay, so we know that in here, this black area goes up probably about halfway and then kind of curves in and comes over to his eye. So his eye is centered above this center line. So that means his eye is going to be just slightly about this area. Okay, right about this area. And he's got like a lower lid there, and we're not going to draw his full eye just yet. We'll come back and do that. And then this black area goes under what looks like that lower lid and then comes straight down and into this line. So we know this line actually comes out a little further out. Oops. Out here. Okay. And then there's some stuff going on here and up here. And then he starts his little mohawk about here. And if you're using a black background, the reason I said that is you would need to physically, because it's white and we're gonna need to leave white for this, as the paper actually is gonna end up being the white, then you gotta make sure that you create all this in white. And now my picture up here is kind of hard to see the different hairs. And since we're sketching, I'm not going to worry about making it too perfect, because that's something that I would need to use my glasses, sadly enough, reading glasses, to be able to see all the detail. All right, so the eye. Now we can kind of check. So it's kind of funny, if you take away this little section right here, it almost looks like a flamingo head, you know? So the more shapes that you see, the more it will help you determine whether you have it right. You want to look at the distance between here and here, and you'll see that it's thinner here, and then it gets wider, a little bit wider, but not that wide, which means that I need to curve this down a little bit. I think at one point I made him a little fatter, but now when I compare it to the upper part of the neck, I realize that it needs to be thinner. Okay? All right. So let's see. So we have the head. I checked this section. He's got a little bit of a section that comes up above the eye here. It's going to have some other color. So I'm going to come around his eye. And then this black does kind of extend up a little bit more. So we're going to cover all that up. Okay? And this goes up and down and then up and down. And I think for the most part, I have a fairly good sketch. Okay, let's determine where he stops being white. So he's in here. There's a few fibers. It comes to a point. fibers, hairs. Oh, I said fibers. Okay, and then there's his wing there. And then we're gonna come up this side. Okay, and get that there. Now he's got little hairs that come out here too. So if you're gonna use a black background, you would actually wanna draw that out a little clearer so that you can see it against the black. There'll be the white hairs, okay? And I'm gonna make this wing a little more subtle now that I realize that that's what I started with. But now when I see it compared to the size of everything else, I know I'm a little off. Now, sometimes it's best to draw something and then walk away and then come back to it, because then you'll see if something's at a bad angle. And I don't have time to do that today, so I'm just gonna go ahead and do it. So I've got it in here, and I'm gonna look and make sure that that V here is at the right angle, then it comes back up. Then this goes out a little further and then down. So I'll erase some of that. And I think that's pretty close. Okay, and I just kind of kept going here, but I'm really not going to end up doing anything down there. We're going to let it fade out. All right, and then we've got his beak, and that changes color. And then the rest, I'm not going to worry, because I'm not going to do all the details because I'm not drawing in pencil specifically. I'm going to be doing them in water soluble, and I want to talk to you about the different values of the pencils. All right, so that should be good enough for a starting sketch. If I need to make other changes, you know, I'll come back in and make those. Put some of that there, and probably some little hairs here, and then that's gonna be good. Okay, so that's a start. Let's see if I have this positioned well so you guys can see it. Looks like it. Now let's talk about the pencils, and if you're still sketching, that's okay. You can still work on it a little bit. Just look up every now and then and look at the pencils as I describe them. The pack that I had put on the discussion page for materials is by Faber-Castell, and you'll see that it comes with an HB, a 2B, if you guys can read that, HB, 2B, 4B, 6B, and 8B pencil. Now, this was weird. I think I just threw these back in here because I had an extra 2B. Some reason I had two 2Bs, so I thought, well, maybe it came with two of those, but it didn't. I think I just threw it in there by accident. So I have more pencils than we actually are using. So those are the 5 different pencils. So if you are using regular pencil, not the water soluble kind, make sure if you can get these, if you don't have all of them, don't worry. I'll talk about that too. You have an HB, and that's the lightest pencil in this pack. Where with my regular pencils, I had a 2H. The 2H and the 3H, or you'll see a 4H, sometimes you'll see a 6H. Those are for sketching. When you get to the HB, that's about as dark as you want to use when you're sketching, because it's much easier to erase with these lighter pencils. So when you're just doing an outline, I would have done it in a much lighter outline than I've done today, because I prefer to work with a light sketch and then just fill in the rest with the color. So this is your 2H. You might have a 4H, but in this case, in this scenario, when we actually fill in color, we're just gonna need the HB as the lightest, and then 2B, which is pretty standard, you can find really easily, 4B and 6B. 4B is kind of medium, kind of gray, black, and then your 6B and 8B are your darkest pencils. So when you want to fill something black in, for example, if you want to do the background, you would use that 8B pencil, okay? So it comes with those 4 pencils, and let's see, make sure I have what I need, since I may have switched them around. I have the HB, you guys can see them over here. Here's the HB, here is the 2B, here is, oh, nope, see, that's what I'm missing, the 4B. So what I did is I just confused my pack, but that's all right. We don't have to have the 4B. All right, we'll use the 6B and we'll use the 8B. because there's a lot of black in this photo. So I don't have enough of the different tones that I necessarily need that 4B pencil. But if you have that and you want to use it, that's perfectly fine. I should have checked this. I didn't think I had opened this, but I thought I just did, but maybe not. All right, so there's my pencils, and then it comes with a brush, which you can see. I actually need to rinse it because I used it briefly this morning. But you can see it has a nice little point on it. Where's my camera? Right here. You see it has a nice little point, and as you come out, it also is a fairly long brush head, so you're able to also fill the outside. So we're only using one brush today. If you need another brush, if you want to do the black background, I'd suggest you use more of a flat brush to kind of spread out the color. But in this case today, I am just going to do the bird, and so this brush should be sufficient. All right. And then the other thing I recommend you have, obviously beyond the sketching pencil and an eraser, is an extra piece of watercolor paper. Whenever I work with any kind of watercolor pencils, watercolor medium, watercolor, graphite pencils, anything I'm working with on watercolor paper, I like to test things because, as you know, for those of you that have worked with watercolor before, it's not a very forgiving paper. And so you have to be very certain of your lines when you put them down on paper. And you want to be sure you know what tones you're using. So I'm going to put away my drawing pencil, and I'm going to focus on these. And if you have the 4B, make sure you try that one out too. I should have had a backup here, but I don't, so I'm not going to go get it right now. So I'm going to show you by just drawing a line on my practice paper of each one of these. So I'm going to draw HB, okay? And I'm actually pressing down. If I don't press down, you see how light you can go? So that's the option 2. You can put more down. Okay, so that's my HB. Then I'm going to go to 2B, and I'm going to do that light line again. And this time I'm going to go darker. And that's my 2B. This is a good practice sheet too, if you're just learning. Now I'm going to go to my 6B. And I'm just going to press down lightly and do a light line of that one. And then I'm going to do a dark line. See, it's starting to get much darker, especially when it's wet. And that is my 6B. And if you haven't done your 4B, I would go ahead and try that one so you'll know what it looks like. And then here's my 8B. When I moved my materials, a few things got scattered, so I need to find my pack of these pencils. All I could find was the one set. Well, actually, no, I thought I had 2 sets. I found all the pencils. In fact, I may even have them at the Art Center, because I have a lot of things there that I had brought. I haven't gone back to get anything at this point. All right, and this is my 8B. So the other thing you need, a cup of water. Doesn't matter how much, you're not going to use very much water, so just a little bit. I just have a big cup because I have these like not leftover, these recyclable or whatever yogurt or soup containers, and I tend to reuse those over and over. So I have that, and then obviously some paper towel so you can dry your brush and take any color off of it if you need to. And I have those sitting here as well. So now I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to wet the end of it to make sure I have a point. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to test out these colors. So I'm just going to go right over those lines. You don't have to put a lot of water down, just touch it gently and slide it out. And if you want to create a little bit of a smudge just to see what that color is going to look like, feel free. But you can see it's very light. You can hardly see it. Now I'm going to wet my brush again, Come down to the next line. Not too much water. And spread it out. And you can see how that's just a little bit darker, not a lot darker, a little bit darker. And something you can do if you're trying to, like there's an area you're working with and you want to get it a little bit darker while it's wet. Oops, I just smudged my other line. I have to be careful with that. I can go in there and add a little bit more color. But one pass is usually good. If you go darker than that or add more water than that, I'm afraid you'll tear your paper, okay? But you can say you can get a little bit darker. Okay, I'm gonna skip this bottom line to start. Silly me, I have to make sure my hand's not wet. Okay, so next, I'm gonna go to the 2B. And I'm gonna spread that out. So you guys can do one of these, each line at a time. And if you want, you can even, since it's gonna be your sample, kind of go over the letters too, okay? Now I'm gonna grab some more and do the next one. All right, and now the 6B. Actually, I'm gonna do these letters. I kind of almost lost that up there. Okay, grab some more water. Do your 6B line. And then the one that's got more color, you're gonna see a lot more color from it. So the reason I wanted to show you the two lines is even when you're working intentionally in an area that you want really dark, if you're not certain, especially if you haven't used these before, draw it lightly first. You know, get that filled in a little. You can always come back for a second pass on it. And that way you don't oversaturate it to start. Okay, 6B. It's so funny, I'm gonna go over this HB. Well, I don't know that I can. All right, now I'm gonna go to my 8B. Okay, spread it out a little. Now, if you press down, you're gonna see the line that you drew. So that's the other thing you need to be careful with. If you're just trying to shade, I'm gonna show you how to do that when we start drawing, so that you can see that you honestly wanna start possibly with a line and drag the color out. Now this is gonna be very saturated. I drew that one really. And then I already had that little piece there that I smeared with my hand. But you'll see even the first time I pass through here, it's darker, but it's not as dark as I'd want it to be. But the line, you see where the line is? The line you can see really well. Okay, so we're going to work on that a little bit. All right, how's that look? And because it's watercolor, it will drip, which is part of the reason with watercolor you want to work flat and you don't want to oversaturate an area. You can always go back and do a second coat, a third coat, whatever you need once it's dry. We follow the rules of this as we do with watercolor. If you have an area that you just wet, that you just worked on, and you're working on it and then you step away from it and you come right back because you noticed you missed something and you wet it again, you're likely going to tear the paper. You need to let it dry. In some cases, I would have a blow dryer. I'm going to be working in different areas. I'm going to come back to areas, so I'm not going to worry about the blow dryer today because I'll give it plenty of time to dry in between. But if you're working in a hurry or you just anxious to work in one section, have a blow dryer handy. You can blow dry it and then you'll be able to go right back to it. Okay? And ignore this See, now I'm the artist, I'm picky. I'm gonna have to smudge it out because it bugs me. Okay. The other thing, since I'm doing this anyway, is you don't want to work right beside an area that you were just working with, or then it's going to smear. So I think this is going to end up smearing, but that's okay. See, that's like a second coat because we came back over it after I had smeared it with my hand before. So now I got a messy line, but that's all right. All right, so let's put that aside. That gives you an idea of what it's going to look like, except for my smudgy line below. All right, and you can see your 6B and your 8B, if I hadn't oversaturated it, would be the darkest ones. All right, a lesson in oversaturation. I'm going to throw this to my side. I'm still going to use it to test things sometimes, but I'm going to throw it over here, okay? So I usually start light and then get darker as I go. And I try to work in the same tone. So I'm going to be working all over the place. And then I'll come back to things the second time and kind of do the same thing. So this photograph that I'm using has a lot of shadows. And the tricky part is the texture. Because if you just want a general photo of a pelican, right now, even just in a contour drawing, it looks like a pelican. But if you want to be more realistic and you want to be able to do the little hairs, then that's where you have to be careful because you can't take the white back out. So if you were painting in acrylic, for example, you could do all your shading and you could come back and you could add in all those white hairs. We won't be able to do that. Now, if you make a mistake and you want to come back, you know, you can do a mixed media piece. So you could do this, you could let it dry. You could come back with perhaps a chalk pastel pencil and get some of those white hairs in. I tend to work in color more than I do black and white, so that's always my inclination. So I have to remember when I work in black and white or I'm working with watercolor that I have to leave my white. Okay, so that's something I want to emphasize. Otherwise you have what looks like a gray pelican rather than a white pelican. I'm going to take a sip of water here real quick, if you'll excuse me. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to start out by a few shadows, but instead of laying a blob of a shadow, I'm going to take my, let's see, we're going to go with the lightest. We're going to go with an HB, okay? And I'm going to draw. Essentially what I'll be doing is drawing. So when I draw, I'm going to draw lightly because I'm just going to leave some white areas. And if I press down too hard, it's going to leave the lines. So I'm going to enlarge the area that I'm working in. So if you're working from a printed copy, you're going to want to take a really close look. I'm going to start here in the middle. And you're going to want to see the direction of the hairs. So more importantly, here, now that I've enlarged it, okay, I gave myself the area that I was working in. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to bring a few of these hairs down into the dark section that I'm going to leave white. And I'm going to come up a little bit and I'm going to do another one. And then here's another one. And they're going to get thinner and thinner, okay? And so above that is where we're going to do some of our shadows. So this is the light being, this is the lightest pencil. I'm going to go in the direction, I'm not, this area right here is very white in the photograph, and that's how I'm going to leave it. And then we're going to define these lines here. So we started to do it before as a sketch. Now I can be more specific. So I'm going to erase, come in here, and using this pencil, I'm going to create some of those fine hairs. Remember, this goes to a point and then comes back. All right, because I want to be sure that back in here I put that black. And then I'm going to leave all this white and I'm going to come to about here where I start to see a shadow, and I'm just going to put little little light hairs in. In the direction that the hairs would go. They're gonna be white, so we're just gonna create some shadows. And I'll put some little lines that I'm gonna smudge a little with my brush. And then I'm gonna do some lines up in here. Probably chose a harder subject to start, but I love pelicans. I have a huge painting I'm working on that I still can't seem to come back to it, mostly because of the feathers. I had trouble with them, and once I figured it out, I should have just finished it. Then I have that artist block to go back and do that. So I'm just doing a little series of tiny little lines. Bring that closer to the screen so you can kind of see it. Just tiny little lines, which are going to turn into some shadows, but I want them in the direction of the hairs on the feathers. Feathers, hairs, I'm not sure what they are on a pelican. Should you call them either? Not really feathers. I think it's more feathers up in here. I don't know. I haven't looked at one close. They're probably feathers. Okay. So we're just going to do a little bit of that, especially under the beak. Okay. And then I'm going to put my pencil down, because if I go too much, when I add water, they're going to be all over the place. All right, and then I'm going to come in and I'm just going to wet it and kind of let it do its own thing. I'm not even worrying about the specific lines. Letting it blend a little. We'll come back and put some darker areas in. This is all like shadows. But I'm following the lines. So you don't want to smear a bunch of water, because we don't want a smudge there. We want to follow the lines and then just put a little bit of water on each. Okay. And we're going to come back. We have more shadows we're going to add. This is just the start. But see how you can still see some white in there. I don't want to lose all the white. And I don't want to go below this area. We want it to be obvious that it's white. And kind of put some color in the end. Okay? All right, start there. We'll start there. Now I want to show you, that was with the HB, so that was the lightest one. Now I want you to clean your brush, rinse your brush, good practice. Set it aside. Go ahead and grab your 6B. And my 6B has a nice sharp edge. My 8B needed to be sharpened a little, but I'm okay. So I thought I had used these before. I just put them in wrong. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and remember these feathers I had in here. I'm going to just lightly fill in some black on the side that's supposed to be black. Don't go out too far, because there's some white feathers beyond that. A little bit of black there. And then if you follow the line down, you can actually create some feathers that are coming from the left in this section, if you're looking at your photo reference. And they kind of curve in. Okay, so they curve in just a little. Just going to do a few of those to demonstrate. And then I'm going to give this wing a little bit of an edge. I'm working with the darkest pencil. There's really nothing distinctive on the edge of this, so in fact, you have a little bit of black on this side, so I'm going to throw a little bit in here and then leave some space or the ends of the white. Now here's where you have to be very careful when you go to fill this in, because again, we want it to look like those little hairs or feathers, not a smudge. So on this side of that, I want to take the very tip of my brush, and very lightly just touch it. I've wet my brush, but I'm touching it very lightly, and I'm kind of following the edge of this wing, and then I'm dragging it back into those lines that I had drawn. And this is what I was talking about, so that you don't oversaturate an area when you're, you want to be sure you start somewhere and then just drag the water out. And if you ever have too much, blot it, okay? Better to blot it and come back and move that color around than to oversaturate. Okay, not real dark yet. It's okay, I'll get darker. You'll see the line is, but not where the feathers are, but we'll come back and do it. And if you want to drag that out a little bit more so that it dries faster and clear up some of that water, bring it out a little bit more. Okay, and you can even borrow from the water and the color that you have already and add a few more lines if you want. Because we're gonna have a little bit of that going up. Okay, rinse your brush, have a little water on the end, and we're gonna do the same thing here. Now I have to turn my paper in order to do this from that angle. So I'm gonna turn my paper a little bit, and I'm gonna come in from here and from this side. I've got a little bit too much water on my brush, so I'll brush it out. And then I'll come in. Very gentle. Sometimes it's better to just use less water when you're doing those little areas. And we'll get a little darker as we go. Okay, same thing here. Let's see. Let me turn this a little. Grab a little bit of water. And where are we? Is that in the right section? I think I drew those incorrectly now that I'm looking at it. Yeah, I have them in the wrong. I don't know where I was working. That's really strange. So I'm going to erase this really quick. I don't know what I did here. I must have had it enlarged and was in the wrong section. So I'm going to come back and grab my 6B pencil. Sorry about that. Okay, so up in here, the feathers are actually going in this direction. Sorry about that, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and do those lines this way instead of the other way. And they kind of blur in here. It's hard to see it. So I'll do a few of those lines. You can see more of the in-between up here, and it almost looks like it's weaved. Almost like weaved. Now they start in this direction when you're doing the wing. And again, kind of looks like weaving. But I'm just doing the edge. So you want to look at your shapes and the direction, because then after I have that, then I'm going to come in here and do another one. It almost looks like a weave. And you can kind of see that a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to wet my brush, and again, I'm going to work in this section where I was supposed to be working, and I'm going to fill in just a little bit. Just working the lines right now. And then I can add some if I have enough left over. All these are going to go into the center here. There's like a little line where, and then the others here are going to go into the center as well. So if I take my 6B and I just draw a little line here to remind me where the center is. Now it's wet, so it's gonna bleed out a little. Then I know now the feathers on this side are coming in this way. These are going this way, kind of like a leaf almost. And these are going this way until they hit this section here. Where it's really black. So I'd already painted some of this. I'm going back with the brush, with the pencil, sorry. And I'm filling it in again, but I'm not gonna paint it yet because it feels like it could be still a little bit wet. These kind of weave. So a lot of texture in this example. And I'll come back here and follow the lines. And I'll wait on that left side because I think it's still wet. Okay, so we did this section here, correct? Yes. I don't think we did these though. I'm gonna go ahead and going ahead and filling these in. I want to be sure you see that there is an edge here. So I'm coming back with color that's already on my brush. And I'm just bringing that in a little bit. So you don't lose that. And you can come back and use the pencil when it's wet, and it'll give you those darker lines. So you don't have to wet every time. All right, and let's see. We're not going to spend all our time on the feathers here, but I'm going to do a little bit more here. You can kind of see where I'm following the direction. They're not going to be exactly the way they are on the photo, but they'll be in the right direction. All right. There is a shadow as we come down a little further here. This turns. So it's okay to take your brush and where I was working from, go ahead and smudge that out a little bit. This is what I meant earlier about smudging it out. All right, and then here it's just a little bit lighter. I'm gonna go ahead and follow the edge of this line. In fact, I think I'm gonna do that with the whole thing so you guys can see this better. I'm gonna come back, since I did end up drawing this in the water pencils. Of course, now I'm committed to these shapes, so if I find a mistake later, I'm just gonna have to improvise. Because once you fill that in, you can't erase it. Don't want to go too dark there because there's some white there. Come back, touch anything up that I missed. And here it's going to be darker too. So if I want to take my 6B and right here on the edge, I'm going to come in a little. Fill that in a little bit. And drag some of that out. So sometimes I follow along on the Facebook live feed to see if anybody's commenting or asking questions. And I really haven't done that today, so I'm not sure. If you have a question or something you missed or something you want me to demonstrate, let me know. Some people watch these and just watch them and then they come back or they do it another time, and that's fine too. Okay, so I don't want to add any more water there. And then up here, I'm going to end up doing the same type of feathers there. So right now what I want to do is, even though I'm not doing a black background, is I want to emphasize these hairs on the end of the pelican that become very short hairs in here. And I just did them really quick just to demonstrate. Okay, so if I did the black background, then the white would stand out, but I'm not doing the black background. Much darker edge on this one. And since it's wet, I can come in here and also fill some of this in the direction of the wing feathers. On this side, they kind of come up in here. And on this one, it's kind of a white edge. So where you're going to emphasize that this is changing into this is you're going to go up to this line and you're going to do the feathers that come down in that direction. I'm trying to do a few more than I'm doing. Keeping this just black right in here. This is the top of this section. But you kind of get the idea on the direction. You don't want to put too much water because you're trying to leave some white in between. Just a tiny bit. Right. So we'll do some more of that shortly. Okay, I'm going to work on the neck again. And with the neck, you have a lot of white. So again, we're going to come back here and now we're going to emphasize some of the shadows. So I have a little bit of color on my brush. So I'm going to, in the direction of the feathers, I'm going to use what's already there. So that's a nice piece, is you can come back and take from other areas, and you can use that when you're just filling in a little section. You'll still have some of the color on your brush. But see how these little subtle little hints of shadow, follow the direction. So I want to use my HB again. Follow the direction of the feathers. There's a little bit of a darker shadow right in here. So I'm going to dry that in. To start out, and then I'm going to come back here where it starts to also do the same thing. And I'm doing little short lines. It's short hair, but you're going to leave the white in between. And so that's why I'm working with an HB, so I don't put a lot of darkness in there. Wet my brush very lightly. Come back through. So I put some of the hairs in there, but I'm smudging a little bit of it. Okay. Let's see, we're going to go up a little higher. Now, right up in here, we're going to stay out of the hair for a minute, and we're going to come in here. There is some texture in, like, right around his beak. So you don't want to get too black to start. You want to maybe use probably the 6B, maybe even a 2B. Let's try 2B here. And it's going to be really dark in here. And it's got, it's not as, like, it doesn't have the feathers like this white does. So you want to emphasize the black in here, right along the edge. Right along the edge. And he also has that same color in that beak. So that's where you have to be careful, because you're going to have to make this really, really dark, which probably means you're going to use your 8B pencil right in here to emphasize the area between the beak and, I guess, what you would consider his cheek. So in here, I'm going to go really dark along this edge. And same thing in here, right along the edge here. And you can actually bring that down into the beak all the way down. One section is very, very dark. And then what's going to happen is, not at the bottom, but when you get close to the bottom, this actually branches out into this line. Okay? And then you can keep going. And then he's got a little section that comes out here. And then he's got a little point at the very tip. You don't want to miss that. I'll show you, you know what? There's a little bump right there too. So I'm going to do the little bump. At this point, you can see I start to pick up. I end up with working with two things at one time. Just for the sake of time, I leave these things in my hands. Okay, there's a little bump right there. And then there's like another section that's kind of shaded that goes up from there. But this part is the dark part. And it stops short. Okay, so there's a little bit of texture in there. And it's kind of a little bumpy texture. So it's going to be hard to capture with the pencil. So what I am going to focus on is creating some lighter areas. Let's see, I keep moving my picture around so I can see it better. Sometimes it's better to work from a computer screen than it is to work from a printed copy. Number one, because unless you have a really, really excellent printer, the color isn't always accurate. And with black and white, you'll lose some of your detail. So it's almost like he's got some sparkles in here, which are gonna be hard to achieve unless you leave some tiny areas. So I'm using the 8B. Wait, am I using 8B? No, I'm using the 6B. I'm gonna use the 8B. Well, actually no, let's use the 6B. And I can leave little spots, maybe, like color around that. Just leave little areas now and then that don't have any color. Just to maybe insinuate that it's a bumpy texture. So I don't want to leave like dots. So we're going to fill a lot of that in. Just little spaces. Let's go ahead and fill that in with water so you can see it in the small scale. Let me get you close. See how I filled that in? Didn't completely blacken it all because this is going to get pretty dark when I wet it. So it's wet now. And you want to work with just a little bit of water on the tip. So you leave some of those white spots. Otherwise you'll fill the whole thing. And you just want a little one every now and then. I'm going to go along the end. Make sure you guys can see it. Yes. Okay. And I'm just touching around those. So some of it I'll cover and some of it I'll show. There we go. And that's probably more than you need. So like I'll come back and I'll cover some of it up. Right now, you'll see that it just gives you the illusion of some type of a texture in there because I'm leaving a few of those dots. Okay. And let's see. So let's go and get dark in here again. So I'm going to this time take my 8B. I think I was using the 6B before. And I'm going to fill that in a little. So you can see how dark it gets. Wet your brush, not too much. And with some of those, I'll weave some of those feathers in there. So you're starting to see the white a little bit more than you did in the beginning. But it's just safer to start light and then just keep adding to it. And I don't need to add more hairs in here or feathers, but I'm just doing it because I have leftover on my brush. Okay. All right. Where else did we go? We went all the way up with this. So I want to be sure that this actually stops. You know what? No. Okay, so let's go back. This line actually goes to, is short. So it kind of goes up and then to here. So I didn't stop it quick enough. You know what? It must come out. It comes out a little bit and then attaches to this section. And then out here, this part actually goes out wider. I didn't check my sketch on the beak very well, did I? It goes out wider and then goes to the bottom. See where it connects on the bottom. It just kind of stops right about here. Okay, so this section up here is a complete section. So I should have drawn it lighter. This is a complete section here that's lighter, and then this section is the dark part, so I didn't want to go too far with that. Trying to make that line straight. There we go. And up. All right, almost went too far with that. Okay, 8B. No, 6B is what we were working with. Got to blow away the eraser marks. So in here, this is where we were working that we're getting darker. So you can't really tell where it stops. It stops somewhere in here, and you just don't see it very well. So I'm just gonna make these little marks. And this section is gonna be darker in here on this side. And then we're gonna do the lighter in here, and we're gonna leave those little texture areas. Just leaving little spots, most of which will be end up filling in. All right, now I'll take my brush, wet it. We could use some more dynamic music. Tell you what, this is so relaxing to me that I could get really sleepy really easily listening to smooth jazz. But I was trying to keep it light for you guys so that you can hear what I'm saying. Hopefully you've got something a little more energetic playing in the background. But if that's how you get relaxed, you listen to a little jazz, little blues, maybe some Andrea Bocelli. I wouldn't suggest yoga music. That might just be too relaxing. Okay. I'm going to get the edge of this dark. Now that I've got all that in there, that helps. I'm working in sections. You have to go back and reduce the size of your illustration, of your photo reference again, so your illustration doesn't get out of whack like mine almost did. But I fixed it. He just has, it's interesting, he has those lines that are not real distinctive. This actually can go out a little bit further, but it's hard to see because of the black in the background. So the key is these up in here have some little bit of it looks like a crack almost here. And I'm using color that's already on my brush. Kind of put that shadow in, and then I'm dragging this, which is darker on this side anyway, all the way down. But then it kind of splits up at the end, so I'm spreading this out so there's not a line. See how you guys see how I lost my line there? That's on purpose. All right, that's better. And then he's got a lot of darkness in here, which I'll come back with the darker pencil later. And right now while it's wet, I still have water on my brush. I'm dragging some of this up. And it gets lighter after that, so I don't want to go down any further with the shading. I mean, go up for any further with the shading. All right, there we go. Now, I need to make this line here more visible. I'm going to bring it down gently. And it just kind of disappears towards the end. I just wet this, I'm not going to wet this one right away. And then I'm going to fix the edge of his beak and make it nice and neat. Again, that kind of fades into this section here. And then this section right here is really dark. Just this little area right here. And then I'm gonna erase on the outside a little. I guess the beauty of using a black background is that you can just go right over that if you have that in there. All right. Now this looks a little bit of a hot mess, so there's a whole lot of detail in here, and I don't want to spend the time putting every single feather in. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to come back, let's make sure it's dry. You don't want to work in sections that are still wet. Like I said, we'd go back and forth. And I'm in here going to just draw a lot of this in without putting necessarily a bunch of feathers in. I'm just kind of insinuating they're there, leaving some white edges. And I'm using right now the 8B, so this is going to be, you're going to have to work with a little bit of water in order not to oversaturate that area and lose some of the white. So kind of weaving those feathers in. And this was the darker area here. There was a shadow, so I'm going to go ahead and put some of that color there. Very lightly though. Looks like a shadow. And for that area specifically, I'm going to go ahead and not worry about the blending because it's okay. It's in the shadow. And it kind of comes out a little further than that, maybe to here. We'll add more black to that. So a little bit of water only. You can use a smaller brush if you wish. I'm going to come in here and just kind of go back over some of my lines. I grab some water every now and then, I blot it, and then I go. Starting to get a little darker. I'll come back with my 8B. Right there, especially right before those white feathers, I want it to be especially dark. With a finer or smaller brush, you could probably leave a little bit more detail than I'm leaving, but we're doing a little less detail for the sake of time. You can kind of overall get an idea of how this works. Now, I'm not going to go any lower. This area needs to be a little bit darker. And this is getting darker, but it's not quite there yet. This area as well needed to be darker. And I'm gonna actually use my 6B and come back in one more time. Again, kind of weave some of those feathers in. Then they kind of get thinner. So I've gotten a little bit dark here. Didn't want to get that dark. So I'm not going to put too much in here. Okay, because right in here is where it was the darkest. So I want to keep that darker. And I'm going to go a little higher on his shoulder there. All right, this one's going to have a lot more black. This one is not going to have as much. So again, you're going to have to just bring some lines down, kind of insinuate the weaving. All right, and then up in here, we're not gonna worry as much about the white. We're gonna get a little darker, but they kind of go in this direction. So I'm gonna do the weaving. And they come around. So it's up and down and up and down. And we'll come back to some of that. Sometimes these feathers are a little tiring. As we go down, we get a little bit longer. Not necessarily losing the center, but it's going to fade anyway. And some of the lines that aren't there, you can just kind of add them. So you can see his shoulders real well, but we need a little bit a lot more black up in here. So I'm getting a little heavy on that end there. Take advantage of the color that's on here and bring some lines in. Okay. You guys are trying to get in the hang of this. I picked a harder reference to do in a hurry. And I'm not doing close-up work very well because I'm not close up to it. But it'll do for an example. Okay. And I kind of want a little bit more distinction between this wing and this area, so I'm going in a little thicker with the black. Just along the edge. To make sure you can see it. Okay, so this one still needs a lot more black. We'll go back here. And especially on the end, you're gonna see some of the white, so you're gonna wanna leave some white spaces. But other than that, I'm gonna weave these lines in the direction of his feathers. And I'm not gonna paint that yet. I think it's still wet in areas. We'll come back and do that in here in a moment, okay? So I can pick up some of this color if I was just working on it, and I can bring it up in here for a little bit more shading because he's very white. So his feathers are now kind of pointed downward. So I don't want to mess that up. Okay, so I'm gonna actually, sometimes this is another thing you can do. You can take some of your color, I'm gonna flip this over, I think, and I can put the color that I want here on another piece of paper, and then I can wet that. And see, I just have a whole bunch of color I can use. So when I come in here, there's some areas that are really dark. Rather than having to draw it in, I'm just gonna paint right along the edge. Which I kind of already done below, but I wasn't there yet. Okay, so anywhere I wanna go real dark without having to draw it in, I just pick up the color from the other part. This will liken more to watercolor painting, you know. This area is really, really dark. I'm not going to do a lot of texture for that. Just a tiny bit, right around in the right around in here. Leave a little highlight every now and then, so they know it's not. People know it's not flat. And it gets really dark in here. You have to look for the shapes sometimes to, just like when you're drawing, it's like a puzzle, and you're gonna look for your darks. But I have a lot more control now. So when I come down, well, actually I'm gonna stay up here for now because I keep forgetting I just worked on that. Don't work with watercolor all the time. I have to remind myself. And if you don't either, then you have to remind yourself, don't go back over an area you just did. Okay? And I just like little textures in here, so I'm gonna leave some space. You could use a little masking fluid too if you wanted to, if you're trying to texture up an area and you don't want to not leave any white. That helps. Okay, we'll get darker in there. I'm still, see how much I still have because I press down so hard. If you've done that, if you do this on a regular basis, which I don't, then you can be braver about starting out real dark in areas. But I am not that brave. And I am just showing you how this medium works. This is not my best medium. I'm pretty sure you guys will figure that out by the time I'm done. I can draw, but when it comes to painting, I think I feel I'm a little bit better at the acrylic than I am at watercolor. That's because for years I was a scenic painter, and I worked with acrylic, and I worked with latex, and it's just whatever you get used to. Whatever you practice the most, you tend to be the best at. And since I teach a lot of different mediums and I don't practice this one that often, but I like doing it, okay? So what you don't want to do is come in here with the very dark when there's no black. If there's no black, don't pick up the black, okay? Come in here, and now I can get darker. So again, I'm going to show you. So you just take some of that, take the AP pencil and give yourself a nice big space. Rub down, rub down, rub down. Plus this one is already kind of dull anyway. Rub down, rub down, rub down. Take some water. So I'm starting to lose that already. So I'm not going to do the whole thing because I want to save this. And now I can come back here in those areas that need to be darkest with my point. And I can start emphasizing it. That way I can get the black. I think the wind's starting to pick up outside. For those of you that are local, I live in Norfolk, and I live over in Ocean View by the bay, which is nice. We've got the beach, and now that we are not supposed to go out on the beach except for exercise walks, it's nice to have it right outside the door. I can walk the dog. But the negative aspect is the high winds we get. Oh my gosh, it's insane. First time we experienced it, we couldn't believe it. High enough wind and you can feel your house move, and I had never experienced that. So there's the good and there's the bad, but I do love being near the water, which is the reason we moved down. We used to live in a rural area up in Maryland. Shout out to Sykesville, Eldersburg, for anybody who might be watching. And we lived on a 3-acre property. Our dogs used to love it. We don't have those dogs anymore. I just got a new dog who looks a little bit like our old dogs. And there, what we had to worry about was tornadoes and lightning storms. So you see I'm getting darker as I go. And I'm going to go ahead and wet this bottom area so I can use some of that. We have about 20 more minutes, so I'm going to work towards the top here in just a moment. Even though I may not finish this completely, this should give you a good idea of how to use these pencils. Okay, much darker, right? Much darker. Okay, so now I'm going to come up back. I've got a lot of black here still that I have in this little bunch. So I needed to get really dark in here so I can kind of show the distinction between the beak and this area here. So I'm getting really, really dark there. And along the edge again. Make sure it's dry though. And see, I can get darker up in here in places, just in the areas that I need it to be dark. And then up in here. there are, you gotta be careful. A lot of people that appreciate the black and white because black and white photography can be stunning. And so sometimes just drawing in black and white can create a really nice illustration, painting, and it's really good practice, especially if you work with watercolor and you like to draw. Okay. All right. Let's work a little bit on the eye. Okay. So on the eye, I'm going to go ahead and use some of this because it's already here. There is a center dot right where his little cornea is. This is where I could use my reading glasses that I don't have handy. And then I'm going to go along the outside here and create that circle that's right on the outside of that eye. So forgive me if it's not perfect. I remember when I'm working detail like this, I need to have my reading glasses. Sad, sad, sad. I'm nearsighted as I've gotten older. I never needed them before until probably the last year. So for you young people, see what you have to look forward to. It's not that bad though. It really isn't. Okay? And then he's got like, it looks like little lids. So I'm going to come up in here, not too dark, just a little bit. And then underneath here, and right over there. And this is going to be a little bit lighter shading in here, so I'm not going to use the black. And there's going to be some lighter shading in here, so I don't want to use the black. But I am going to do these lines. And there's one that goes kind of up here, and there's one that goes right across here, and then there's one that goes right by the eye, right there, and then a dark area here. Okay, so now he's got an eye. Don't want to leave you without an eye. And then you want to insinuate the feathers kind of coming up this way. So I'm going to do just a few little thin lines. Same here. Same there. Okay. And if I were using a black background, I would likely just kind of work from the outside, but since I'm not, I think I'm running out of my color now. I'll go ahead and use my pencil. I'm going to use an HB. And I'm just going to, again, do those little hairs that just kind of poke out a little. See, my dog's getting a little anxious in the background. He's got really thin ones. And so without that, you just don't want to get too heavy with the black because it's not black hairs. Just going to do a little, and then I'm going to fill them in. That will give you the illusion of white, not black. And then he's got a few, kind of looks like a mohawk up here. It's kind of cute. So I'm going to use my HB. And then there's a little bit of shadowing here. So I'm going to go ahead and do those little lines. Hair feathers. Really should look up the terminology, shouldn't I? And some extra here we're going to shade. Right around this beak, which we still need to color a little as well. Okay. So I'm going to come back. Again, very lightly with the water. Be careful with your water because You don't want to blend all those lines together. You just want to go right back over those lines a little bit, just with the tip of your brush. And then in here, you can smudge it a little because there's a little bit of a shadow. Especially in here. You can smudge a lot. And I want to make sure I have a nice little edge. Right there. Okay. And bring some of that color into here maybe. Whenever I can borrow color from somewhere else, it's helpful. Anything left over here? Probably not much. There's these little teeny tiny lines. This is where you want to get, you know, you add your little tiny details at the end. Ah, no, you didn't want to do that because you know what? It was wet. And you knew that. I knew that. So let's leave that alone. We'll come back to it. Okay, so right along here, right along this little black area, I'm going to do some gentle lines. And I don't want to use that black, that dark black. I want to use this color. So you can do the same thing with this pencil. Or you can go ahead and smudge a bunch over here and wet it. And for some people, they prefer to do it this way rather than to draw. But I showed you, you can do it both ways. Okay? Now, I can't work in that area because I just did. So I'm going to come in here and put a few lines. Except I think that was wet too, so that's not going to work. I'll just smudge it, and we'll come back to it. Let's go instead in here where there's a few little darker areas. All along here. Didn't make that as wide of an area as I should have. That's all right. And there's actually a little bit in here that's dark. That's where its little beak is really sharp. That beak area at the end. Okay. And I can get a little darker with this line too. We've got about, we have 13 minutes left. So I don't know if you're following along with me or if you're just watching this time around and then you'll paint later. Take your time if you're. Okay, sorry about that. If there was an interruption in video just now, I forgot to turn off my phone notifications, of course. And I had a call come in. Never fails. One of these days I'll get the hang of this. So I apologize if there was a sudden interruption. Looks like I'm still going. Yeah, I'm still going. Okay, so I'm gonna go back in here. Where was I? Oh, that's right. I was working on these little hairs out here. So I'm gonna put some again in the direction coming this way. And I'm using the lighter color because we're going into the white. Don't want to insinuate any black in there. But there is a darker shadow up in here. So I'm going to kind of smudge that in a little bit. Just right in this little section is a little darker. And here where, looks like he's got a little indentation in his feathers. And then I want to exaggerate some of this over here. Again, watch your direction. Because remember when I was drawing earlier, I almost messed it up too. And then we can bring some of this up here. There's a little darker, like smudgy color up in here. dark shadow in there, probably because the beak is right there. Okay, and then we need some over here too. I guess I'm just using the very, very tip of my brush, and I'm picking up some color that I have left over here, which works really well. Now up in here, there's a little bit of shadowing, not too much. So because of the white, again, I'm just gonna follow along. I'm gonna clean my brush and I'm gonna drag some of that. Drag, drag, drag. So I could get a little heavier down in here, but I'm not going to because I wanted to at least have not a completely finished work, but just enough for you guys to get the idea. And right in here, he's got some dark tips. It's really interesting. So I wanted to focus on some of this up here. And you guys can finish it after we finish this video. And we have just about 10 minutes, a little less. So let me tell you this, I'm going to continue to do these Facebook Live sessions through April, and we'll see how it goes after that. And if you're interested in a particular medium to work in, you want to see a demonstration, you want me to do a class, a workshop like I'm doing now, I can do that. Just let me know. If it's something that I work in, I'll be glad to do it. I will be teaching classes at the Art Center once we resume normalcy. And I would love to see some faces that may have watched these come to class. It's a beautiful center. There's some amazingly talented artists. I'm not tooting my horn specifically. Trust me, there are a lot of wonderful works there. We have national art shows, which if you're an artist and you want to participate in, just go to the Art Center website. You'll be able to get more information, also on Facebook. And they will do posts if you follow them. I'm making him a little more frazzled, I think, up in here. But see, now I'm just kind of in the direction of his feathers. I just kind of do a few lines. Okay. And there's some incredible other incredible teachers. We have a young woman who does some beautiful acrylic pouring, and her classes have been very popular because she's really good. She's great with color. I may do a demonstration class next week of that. I don't have the setup she has, but it'll at least give you a good idea of how to start if you want to try it. Looks like I need to use my pencil in here a little to get that darker color. And there, we've had a couple of watercolor artists come in and teach. So I typically won't necessarily do the watercolor. I focus more on the acrylic painting. I'll do like a palette painting class where we have a couple designs to choose from. I will teach the student classes, the young students. I'll be working in a variety of mediums. And we just did a watercolor pencil and colored pencil class, so we'll probably continue to do those. And anything that you guys might be interested in, again, just let me know. My business, again, is Tutoring Art, and if you go on to my website, tutoringart.com, I have a section with a lot of different programs that I've done, some of those of which I'm going to be doing on these live videos, and some of which I'll be doing at the Art Center. And I also will do big fundraisers. I've done fundraisers for groups as big as 125. Not working alone, working with other artists. I have done team building. I did them for Allstate, actually, where we put together a six panel mural, and they hung it in their claims offices. This was up in Maryland, and that was a wonderful team building. It was a lot of fun. We did it at one of their conferences. We were over on the Chesapeake Bay as well, and it was just great. And I have some of those pictures on my website. Actually, for the first page, if you go on the first page, I have a lot of photos of some of the programs I'm done, and you'll see pictures of the Allstate people in blue. What do you call it? Hello. What do you wear to protect your clothes? Aprons. Sorry, my mind stopped working. I've done a couple of huge fundraisers for scholarships for Relay for Life. And if you go onto my how to organize a paint fundraiser, you'll see there'll be a list of some of the people I've worked with. So you'll see I've been doing it a while. Okay? All right. I am not going to go any further as I'm just kind of rushing through it now and I don't want to mess it up. And we have about 4 more minutes. So I'm just going to point out a few more things real quick. I am working on this, what do you call this paper? On the Canson watercolor paper, if you guys can see that. This is a fairly inexpensive paper, and you can get that at Walmart as well as at Michael's, and it's easy to get. It's really easy to get. The graphite pencils, I don't think they have at Walmart. I might be wrong, but I'm sure Michael's sells them. I order a lot of my materials on dickblick.com, and I have a business account, so it's really easy for me to go in there and pick out what I need. What else? So if you need advice on materials to use for certain projects, feel free to send me a message. I'm here to give information, not just teach classes. That's right, I forgot. I needed to do this little section, so I need my HP. And so, I can help you with some of that as well. I've done a lot of different public art projects too, so you'll see those on my page. And if you follow Tutoring Art, or if you follow me on Instagram, which is also Tutoring Art, you'll see some of those projects. All right, I need to go into the eye because I remembered I wanted to finish this part of the eye. And then I'm going to stop. And it's about 3:58. And I wanted to tell you about my upcoming classes. So on Monday, we're going to do a watercolor class again, this time with watercolor pencils, and we're going to do watercolor botanicals, which is a program that I've taught for a couple of arboretums and for garden clubs, and it's a lot of fun. And if you look up botanical illustrations, you'll see these tulips or similar drawings to the tulips that we're going to do. And that's what we're going to work on Monday for a couple hours. And then next Wednesday, I'm going to do another step-by-step class. And so if you go on my website, you'll see what that's all about. And that you just kind of need a canvas and some acrylic paint, and it's just mostly for fun. So that's a couple of hours also. And then on Friday, I seem to have drawn a blank. What I just scheduled it this morning too. Silly me. So you'll have to go on my site and find that. All right, so what do you guys think? Can I stop? It's 3:59. Here is my Pelican. So not too bad, not too shabby for someone who doesn't use watercolor all the time. But anyway, you can see these pencils are a lot of fun. So you can use them as regular pencils, and you can also use them as watercolor. And obviously there's some things I still need to come in here and they need to darken, which I can go back and do. So if you're still working on yours or you're going to work on yours, keep in mind I did this in a 2-hour period. with a few distractions and obviously talking you through it, but you can take your time and do a finished piece. You can do a much larger illustration than this. It depends on the size of your paper. And you can even use these on canvas. They don't absorb as fast, so you have to be more patient with it if you use a canvas, but you can also use it. So I think that's it. If you have any questions, send me a message. Otherwise, thank you again so much for indulging me and for watching my Facebook Live tutorial. And I hope to see you guys again soon. Have a great rest of the day.